take to the abuse of power. And I think where we need to start with this is understanding those who have little power. We say they're vulnerable. And what the Latin word for vulnerable is to wound. And so somebody is considered vulnerable if they're susceptible to being hurt or attacked, if they're weaker than others. And so whenever power is used in a way that wounds vulnerable people or exploits them, or because the vulnerable are trusting the person in power, that is called the abuse of power. So a person more powerful than a vulnerable person is now hurting them or exploiting that vulnerable person's trust in them. Then the abuse of power has occurred. Now it's important to take this a little bit further. So a powerful person often will attract vulnerable people. And they will promise vulnerable people that they'll be there for them. They'll guide them and lead them to a better life, whatever they might say. But what happens after a while is the person in power can get frustrated with these vulnerable people. They're just a burden. They're not contributing the way the leader thinks they should. And so he sees them as an annoyance. They slow him down from accomplishing his agenda. And so those people, the vulnerable ones, now become resented by the person in power. And that then leads to abusing them, saying, I'm going to walk all over them because I have to reach my goal. And sadly, that happens a lot, and that is the abuse of power. So there's five things involved in abusing the power. Number one, deception of self. Every person who abuses power lies to themselves. Every person who abuses power is self-deceived in some areas. And it goes like this. They believe that their mission is so important and so good that it justifies hurting people to get there. So that's how they distort and twist it in their own mind. But secondly, it also involves they have to deceive those under them to some degree. They have to get those people to trust them. So they will say, I am going to take care of you. I am going to lead you to the promised land. And they mislead them somewhat. Or they get these people to do their dirty work. They get these people to buy into it's okay to hurt people to get to this goal. So they have to deceive people in order to get followers. Thirdly, they then have to coerce people at times to do what they want, even though the people may not want to do it. So they will use fear, they will use guilt, they will use different manipulation tactics to get people to do what they want, even if it means they have to violate their morals. Then you will find that they always operate by a double standard. So they want you to treat them a certain way, but they don't treat you the same. There's a double standard. And then what is fascinating to me is that people who abuse authority always talk about virtues. The virtues that a good leader would talk about, a healthy leader would talk about. They talk about love and respect and loyalty and honor. The problem is they twist the meaning of those words and give them a slightly distorted or a greatly distorted meaning. So what do they mean by love? They mean, I'm going to love bomb you at first. I'm going to make all kinds of promises to you. I'm going to do all kinds of things for you just so that you will trust me and follow me. It's so I break down your defenses, but then I'm going to use you. And I'm not going to be really giving you unconditional love. My love has conditions. So they've twisted the definition of love. But then they twist respect and loyalty and honor. And now it means if you're a loyal follower of me, if you respect me, then you're going to lie for me. You're not going to rat me out. You're not going to make me face the consequences of my hurtful decisions. You're going to enable me to hurt people and get away with it. So they twist the meaning of virtues. And that can be very confusing to the people who are following them, because they're made to think they're doing a good thing when they respect and honor and are loyal to the person, when actually they're doing a very unhealthy thing. Some of the methods that they use to manipulate people. So they can't lead honestly by presenting the true agenda, by presenting who they really are. They have to deceive, and then they have to manipulate. And so the first thing that gets people into a position of power is they get promoted there. So they get promoted because of their job, because of their skill set, not necessarily because of their healthiness. Or they get married. They get a spouse. Now they are physically more strong than that other person. Or they become a parent. They now have children that they're more powerful than. Children who trust them naturally. And so they now are in a position of power just because they're promoted. But then others use means where they're just not naturally promoted there to gain a position of power. So they will use love bombing. They will charm you. They will flirt with you. They will give you gifts. They will make sacrifices for you, all so that you put them in a position of power. Or they will intimidate. They will use fear. They will use anger. They will just sheer force take over and dominate. That's another way to get to a position of power. Or they will blackmail you. They will find out some dirty secret about you and threaten to expose it if you don't do what they want. Or they will threaten something you love. If you don't do what I want, I will hurt your child. All of those tactics get people to a position of power. And many of those tactics are used by unhealthy people to get to a position of power so they can abuse that power. Now, I want to just take a few moments to talk about the consequences of the abuse of power. I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but almost every evil in our society today is a result of somebody abusing power. So if you were to go over the genocide wars, what are the genocide wars? Somebody or a group of people abusing power, saying we're better than, and so we're going to get rid of them. Colonialism. We have a sad day and a sad couple weeks in Canada where they've just again found more bodies at residential schools of Indigenous children. A culture that came in and said, we are going to make you speak our language, follow our religion. We're going to beat your language out of you. We're going to sexually abuse you. All of that abuse of power. And then slavery. All about the abuse of power. Today we have a major issue around human trafficking, abuse of power, kidnapping, racism. All about the abuse of power. All about somebody saying, we're better than you, so we're going to mistreat you. And we feel justified in doing so. Now, I want to add one piece here, and that's this. Many leaders today, sadly, many people that get to positions of leadership are narcissists. People who want the power, people who want the prestige, people who want others adoring them. And so sad to me is this: we are, as a society, as I see it, are becoming more tolerant for narcissists as leaders. And what we tend to focus on is, but look at their talents, look at what they can accomplish. But I go, wow, they might be able to accomplish some stuff, but the damage they do is horrific. And so what has happened, I think, in our society is when we evaluate leaders, we're not evaluating them as the main priority being they have to have healthy character. What we look for is their gifts, their ability to get things done, to accomplish goals. And as soon as we make that the main criteria, we set ourselves up to have a leader who's a narcissist who will eventually do a ton of damage. Now let me bring it to complex trauma and the abuse of power. And I've already kind of touched on this. I just want to begin to develop it a little bit more. Children are born with an innate trust for those in authority, that they're going to meet their needs, that they're going to keep them safe, protect them. When somebody in authority over them abuses that power, what they are doing is not using their power to bless the weak ones under them, to serve the weak ones under them. What they're saying is, I'm the boss, I get what I want, and you better get in line. And so that is the abuse of power that often happens within complex trauma, that the parent uses their position of power to be self-centered. Now, what happens inside a child who's growing up with the abuse of power? Well, you can imagine they're feeling rejection. They're feeling that this person doesn't want to try to understand them. So they feel very alone, misunderstood, hurt. But then they're angry at how they're being treated. They're experiencing injustice, anxiety, depression. They feel at times it's their fault, so they must be a bad person, shame. All of that is going on. And so what is happening in this child is they love and hate their parents at the same time. There's this growing split inside of the child that still loves them and wants a relationship with them, but is developing a resentment and a hatred towards them. And so what a child then will do with all of that hurt and anger inside is really dependent on the child. Some children will begin to act out right away. They will find kids at school who are weaker and bully them. They will hurt animals. They will hurt objects. They will punch things, write on things. Then some who can't do that because they're not strong enough physically, they develop a heart for the underdog. They're there to protect those who are abused. They begin to take up causes to protect people from bullies and the abuse of power. They bend over backwards to take care of pets that have been abused. Others vow, I will never be like my dad. I will never be like my mom. But sadly, what happens for many is they end up becoming their dad. They end up becoming their mom. And it is such a painful thing when they realize, I've become an abuser of power. So the question I ask is, why did they, when they hated the abuse of power, end up abusing power? So let me give you some reasons, and they come out of complex trauma. So the first is, it's just the way that we grow up and are influenced by our environment, by what is our normal. We are influenced by our parents. So a child that sees dad use his power to get his own way, dad who when A child is defiant. Instead of trying to understand, the child just says, you better smarten up and respect me and do what you're told. They're absorbing all of that. They're developing brain circuits that correspond with how mom and dad handle situations. And then when they grow up and are in a position of power, they just go to that place in their brain. And they start, without even realizing it, acting the way their dad did, responding the way their mom did. It's just the power of a parent's influence in shaping a child. But there's a second reason. What happens for a lot of people in complex trauma children is they have to run around trying to take care of the parents. Dad's angry. I need to go and make him happy. I need to do extra chores. Mom's sad and depressed. I need to run around and do stuff for her. And so they become the parents, and the parents become the children. And so here are the children not able to explore life, not able to be curious and just enjoy life and be carefree. Now they are super responsible. They have to give up their needs. They have to make sacrifice after sacrifice to take care of this family. And without realizing it, what happens for many of them is when they finally get in a position of authority, they go, oh, finally I can take care of me. Finally I can live out my childhood and do what I want. And without even realizing it, they now use their authority to be selfish. All because they didn't have a childhood. And then there's a third reason that comes out of complex trauma, and that's shame. So a person with shame is afraid of being exposed for how weak they are, for how bad they are, for how not valuable they are, so they like to hide. So when a person gets to a point of leadership or having power, if somebody challenges them, somebody disagrees with them, that triggers their shame. People might see I'm a fraud. People might see that I don't have what it takes. So they go to, you better do what you're told. I'm the boss around here. And they abuse their power. But it's really a shame issue. Or they're afraid to ever admit they're wrong. They always have to be right because they think if they admit they're wrong, that people will see them as weak. That's a shame issue that comes out of that. Or for some of them, when they were growing up and their shame was triggered, they felt humiliated. People laughed at them. People made fun of them. And so to show weakness meant humiliation. And so now, if they admit they don't know how to do something or that they were wrong, they're afraid that they're going to get humiliated. Now, what I want you to see is, in their mind, they don't understand the difference between true humility and humiliation. Because for them, true humility means you admit you're wrong, but always in their mind that meant then you're going to get humiliated. And so they resist true humility, which I should say is a key ingredient for not abusing power, but they resist true humility because they're pretty sure it's going to result in getting humiliated, which again is another shame issue. Another thing that comes out of complex trauma is that often children in complex trauma have no control over their environment. There's chaos, there's abuse, there's neglect, and they can't do a thing about it. So when they finally get to a position of power, now they can control their world. And they get a taste of how good it feels to control their world, that they become addicted to that power and never want to give it up. And so they abuse their power. For some, to get to a position of authority can awaken narcissist tendencies that have been there all along, but have never had an arena or opportunity to express themselves. But now in a position of power, something triggers narcissistic tendencies. So now, position of power, you say, I'd like to do this, and everybody says, okay. And you go, wow, I like the feeling of that. And then people naturally respect you because of your position. They obey you. They do what you want them to do. And then you ask them to do favors. And they do favors for you. They make sacrifices for you. And all of a sudden you realize, you know what? They're doing 90% of the sacrificing, and I'm once in a while 10% sacrificing. But I kind of like this type of relationship. That's a narcissistic tendency. And then when things go wrong, I can blame somebody else and nobody disagrees with me. And so for some people, without realizing it, they get to a position of power, and it's like another person starts to come out that is very unhealthy and ends up abusing power, and they didn't even see it coming. So let's go to healing. How do we change this? Because if you've grown up in complex trauma, you've grown up with the abuse of power, you know how hurtful it is. You've experienced all those hurts. Most of you aren't going to want to do that to your children. Most of you are not going to want to do that if you're in a position of leadership in an organization. So how can we have power but use it to bless and not hurt? So first of all, I hope you realize you have to again heal shame. Because as long as there's shame, a position of power will probably be abused because of your shame issues. So keep dealing with shame. Secondly, grow in humility. True humility with safe people always results in connection, in growth, in healing. So grow in humility. People need a leader with humility. And that is the way that you prevent the abuse of power, is to have true humility. Third, if you get in a position of power, stop regularly and ask yourself if there are any double standards happening. Are you expecting people to treat you with respect, but you're not treating them with the same respect? Are you expecting people to make sacrifices for you, but you're not making the same sacrifices?